So you have already merged them,
That is correct.
even though we have not voted to have AIP locations as satellite offices for the absentee ballot clerks. I'm gonna tell you, I'm mad at this. I want Gwinnett County to run like a legal machine. We should be reading this code and we should be following the code, and if there's a question of whether or not you could do this, there was no reason whatsoever that you could not have come to the board members and said, we need to discuss if we can do this. Whoever allowed those purple ABM marked canvas looking bags in those locations, in every AIP location, I would like to know who did that, because they did not discuss that with this board. We are the board of registrars. We are the election superintendents. Nobody else is.
Madam Chair, I'd like to say that the staff, professional staff, has always acted in good faith. They acted in regards to practice that had occurred before. I've even questioned staff about this subject several months ago.
So then why didn't you bring it up to the board?
Because the answer that was given, I was asking, can you return ABM ballots at a location, absentee by mail, absentee in person location? And I was told yes. I said, can you do it on election day? He said, no, we don't do that because we can't get them back to the office in time for the 7 p.m. cutoff on election day. But if they're delivered in an early voting location, they can be taken back to the office in a timely fashion and put in and logged in with all the other ABM locations. So that's the counter to that point you raised about there. The fairgrounds were accepted, and I really think that this has gone on prior to 2020. But I don't have the specific information in front of me on that, but I do remember that absentee by mail ballots have been received in hand. The state does say you can accept. Now, you and I are political people, and I want to digress just a little. You're making a good political point, but the law, if you want to call it a loophole,
I'm making
there's
a
a
good
loophole.
legal point, Stephen. No, I'm sorry.
I think that the law allows this. Now, no telling what's going to happen when the legislature comes back into session, but the law seems to allow this.
The law allows us to establish it. We have not established it.
I believe they're established because we have a registrar at every AIP location, because every AIP location has to be able to register voters that have switched addresses. And therefore, they are sworn, as my understanding, and staff correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there are people at each AIP location that are considered registrars, ergo they can change addresses of voters' locations on site and be given the proper AIP ballot. Also, if they are registrars, then under this, as I understand it, they're allowed to accept the absentee by mail ballots.
Then why did the legislature establish Dropbox law that's so specific as to how many that we can have? Now that's a discussion that a judge is going to have. It's not a discussion that I'm not going to be able to come to a conclusion. But I'm telling you right now, yes, I will. But when I heard that this was happening, I actually said to Zach, I said, you need to stop until we find out if we can legally do this. Because I don't want anything to be done in Gwinnett County that is not on the up and up. The practice continued even after I said that.
Well, hasn't another county been doing this?
Cobb County,
another comparable large
Cobb County is the only county that does it. I had researched that. They have a special table at their AIP locations with a special clerk that all they do is date and time stamp as soon as someone comes in with a paper ballot. We do not do that. We are just throwing them in a purple bag. They're not being date time stamped. They're not being logged into on a log. Cobb County was much more, let's say, thoughtful of how they did this. They have a table. They have a sworn absentee clerk sitting at it, and if you wanna return it there, you have to return it to that clerk. We just have, come on in, put it in the purple bag, nice to know you, goodbye.
Do you would you guys like to hear the actual process of?
I would
Kelvin
love-
can
That
walk
was
you.
one of the things I just wanna hear, at least what our process is, before all of the assumptions are made, how long all of this has been around. It sounds like all of this has started just recently, where it sounds like this has been a practice, this has been established, this is part of also the law in the book that says you can do that. Drop boxes was a separate kind of thing that established more as a result of COVID and having additional opportunities for people to do that. But the existence of drop boxes, my question is, does the existence of drop boxes eliminate what law was already previously established for people to be able to drop off
So I
their
think,
ballots?
I think you're very, very much right that essentially 382A was virtually untouched under SB 202. And I think it's one of these cases where, yes, they established all these Dropbox law, but nobody ever asked the boards of elections registrars, how did you take in absentee ballots before Dropbox? And I mean, I talked to Lynn, and Lynn, I think whenever we called her last week, Lynn's like, what do you mean? How's this an issue? This has been the way that ballots have been taken in by hand for forever. Now, you know, we always did it at the office, and then started doing it at the fairground AID locations in 2020. But I think Lynn was kind of, when I brought it up to Lynn with her historical knowledge of this place and how it's gone, she did not understand how this was an issue. And I think at the end of the day, 382A is what establishes this, and it just never got touched.
It says we may establish,
Yeah, but
we haven't.
But SB 202 did not touch 382A, which
Correct.
is essentially the way that absentee ballots have always been accepted by registrars.
Just
So-
because something's done in the past doesn't make it proper, and you know that, I know that. That's why when I read this and it said that we may establish something, we haven't established it. And that's what tonight's meeting is basically for us. If you continue reading from the State Elections Board, they want us to take a vote and to establish that the AIP locations in Gwinnett County will be able to collect the paper absentee by mail ballots.
Well, Madam Chair, I would say that the establishment of an AIP location by virtue of having registrars there does establish under the 382A. But, and the state, in this letter, seems to indicate we could do it if we follow certain protocol.
We can do it, but we haven't up until this point.
And
We have not had a vote on
I will
it.
say we
But
wanted,
yes, legally, we can establish it that way.
I will say the staff did want to bring this to the board, what was it, last Wednesday night?
In my recollection was that it was added at the very last minute. It was an item that was briefly discussed on Wednesday, at the end of the meeting.
And we were
Right, all the way
concerned
up
about waiting until November 2nd, because the November 2nd was going to be the LNA test.
It was brought up, as I recall, Madam Chair, it
Yes.
did come up at the end of the
It did.
meeting.
And we didn't have a lot of information on it, so therefore it was basically taken. George, you have a
Yes,
comment?
I'd like to know how many ballots we're talking about that have been cast between this time and when it started. How many ballots are we looking at?
Kelvin, do we have the chart in here?
I thought is it on our report that we get every day?
It is on the
Mike?
daily report.
Can you speak up, please? It was difficult to hear you.
Oh,
back
sure.
here.
That's directed to you, George.
Oh, okay.
He was asking how many ballots
Yeah, we're
have been
talking-
accepted at the 5 spots, right, at the 5 locations. Kelvin, you can look that up.
Few hundred.
And that's just what they would all be mixed
Small.
together.
They're all mixed in anyway, so
Bogan
there's no way
is
of
by
taking them
far
out.
the most popular. Bogan.
And Ms. Wilson, what does the state, this letter from the state shares says potential violation, what violations are you looking at?
only be speculating, Mr. Roof, I don't definitively know, but they would probably be saying that there was a violation of, potentially 21, I'm speculating because I have no idea. But I'm speculating that it would be potentially a violation of 21-382A because, the state election board's position would be that the places where ABMs were collected were not established. That's one possibility. I'm also speculating, and I think they allude to this in their letter, if they're gonna do an investigation, of course, they're gonna be asking questions, and I think they're saying in the letter that they have opened an investigation, but they did say in the letter that, they would be looking at the procedures that would be in place with respect to the handling of the ballots, and so if in the course of the investigation, they determine, assuming this process continues, that the method of handling of the ballots was not appropriate or did not par, then the second possible violation, I'm speculating they would assert would be a violation of 21-2-361A1 that addresses the process that should happen upon receipt of an absentee ballot. So I'm speculating potentially 2 violations. I hope that answers your
Yes,
question.
yes, it does.
Okay. Because they talk about in the letter, that they're saying, they talk about what the process should be in terms of the handling, in that second page.
Thank you. So we don't know how many of these.
206.
206.
206.
Out of how many votes?
7,000 something come in, right?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Okay, so Madam Chair, may I make a motion?
Sure, anybody, you can make do you wanna have a comment?
Yeah, just for clarity. we
Sure,
need to
that's
discuss
fine.
it. So it sounds like we may be talking 2 things in my mind. One is that we can establish a process to be able to do that. That's number one. So that is within the law to do that. It's been a practice, maybe it was just a practice that had been done, and not considered any major issue because registrars are seen as an extension of this office, and these places, our early voting places are established as where people can go and hand deliver. I think some people may be even feeling more secure hand delivering the ballots because all of them don't have the drop boxes. So establishing a process, that's one thing. And the other question I think pertains to what you're talking about as well is if we're talking about what to do with those that are already been sent, dropped off into these purple bags. But before, I would like to hear what that process has actually been. I mean, I don't know, it feels like it's just been some assumptions. I would like to really know what's being done already, if you can share that.
So this is, before 2022, this is what we've done since I've been here. I think in 2020 it was more prominent because of the drop boxes, and the fairgrounds did not have a drop box. And so we put a bigger box at the fairgrounds to collect these ballots. Process is if an individual appears at the polling location, an in-person polling location, if that location has a drop box, the poll official offers the drop box to that individual. If the individual prefers to hand that ballot to that poll official, since they are sworn registrars, not only are they sworn registrars, they're also sworn absentee ballot clerks. If they're they're sworn managers, they also take an oath of office. So they are duly sworn poll officials. They will accept that ballot. They will place that ballot into the security bag, which is the purple bag. We have 2 security bags at each location, one for provisional, one for absentee by mail that are delivered to the registrar. That bag is sealed into the end of the night when all of the ballots that are received for that day are removed from the provisional bag as well as the absentee bag. They are accounted for. Those numbers are listed on the chain of custody. Any ballots that are received in a drop box for the locations at the drop box, the drop box ballot transfer form is completed. These are kept separate from those that are received by the registrar. All of those forms in chain of custody absentees are delivered to the elections office each night.
And Kelvin, you would not know the only form that we know of, so I've had reports back to me, no specific details of somebody filling out a form with their absentee ballot. The only form I know of is probably poll watchers are seeing somebody surrendering their ballot, and they would fill out an affidavit saying, I'm surrendering my ballot. We don't have a form for, I'm dropping off my.
So in the case that an individual has ballot in their possession, they would not complete an affidavit. The affidavit is that I was issued an absentee ballot, this ballot is no longer in my possession. I'm signing this affidavit attesting that the ballot was lost, stolen, and that I would not vote this ballot.
The chain of custody form for the bag items, there's a total for provisionals, a total for ABM that have been accepted at that site. Is that correct?
There's a total for all ballots that have been received at that location. There's a total for the ballots that have been scanned on the ICs. There's a total for the ballots that were provisional. There's a total for the ballots that were handed over to the registrar.
Okay.
In the case that that location has a drop box, there's a separate total for those drop boxes.
And I will say as staff, when we reviewed the chain of custody form before the primary, the staff created a very detailed and thorough new chain of custody form after 2020 because they wanted to make sure we had every one of these categories marked. And so I do think we have a really great chain of custody form that lays out all the different.
Madam Chair, I think there's one point too about this that hasn't been talked about, is this is still inside the AIP location during the hours of AIP voting. And I think that was one of the big concerns about the drop boxes to start with, was the monitoring of the drop boxes. So ergo, the putting of the drop boxes inside the AIP location. So I would offer that what's going on in any of these places where it's accepted manually into the bag, the non-drop box situation is mirroring exactly the drop box situation. There's a chain of custody for both types of ballots. So, and there are, as we just heard, there's sworn registrars there who can accept it. So it seems like to me that within the law, as long as we're following whatever the state election board has prescribed here, to me, it seems like the issue that you're alluding to is one that's gonna have to be dealt with by the legislature. But the one that we have now is we're halfway through early voting. And the ballots that have already been taken are already it's raindrops in the pond. You can't separate them. So I would offer, I'm not making a motion yet, but maybe for discussion, that we set up at all the places that are not Dropbox places, look like that, the prescribed way for receiving the absentee by mail ballots is prescribed in this letter to the T. And if we can't do it, then we don't accept them there. How about that? If we can't follow the protocol that's listed here, then we don't accept any further. And I think, to me, that treats those that have come before fairly. You've made several good points. I'm not going to debate that about intent, legislative intent, and all that. But to me, it looks like the law is there. So rather than getting into an arm wrestling thing about the intent of the law says that we can do it under these very prescribed circumstances. So that would be my thought, is that would be the best way to move forward. And again, if an AIP location can't follow those rules, then they can't accept the ballot.
Okay.
To me, it seems like a reasonable compromise dealing with
Okay,
this situation.
my biggest concern is that the law says that we may establish additional registrar's offices or places that for the purpose of receiving absentee ballots, and we have never done that. Now, and I think that's also covered in the state elections board letter. It says that the last paragraph, the last two lines on the first page, it says Georgia law permits County Board of Registrars, that's us, to establish additional locations to receive absentee ballots. We have not done that. We have not established them. Now, whether or not they've been doing this in the past or have been doing it, they've been doing it without this board's vote on it and without this board's knowledge. If additional locations to receive absentee ballots are contemplated, then we must establish a list of requirements to keep the absentee ballots as securely stored as possible from tampering, unauthorized access. Any established additional place of receiving absentee ballots must maintain ballots safely, unopened, and in a manner to prevent tampering and unauthorized access. My problem is we never had a vote on this. We never discussed this. My other problem is that in poll manager and poll worker training, they are told specifically by our staff during training that they may not accept an absentee by mail paper ballot, that either they have to be mailed, of which this board has responsibly put into the budget the money to pay for the return postage, or they have to be returned to a drop box. I know of several poll managers who are telling people where the nearest drop box is, or they have to be returned to 455 Grayson Highway, the registration and elections headquarters. That's the way it should have been handled, in my opinion, because we have not established additional absentee ballot locations.
May I ask counsel, because it goes right to the point you're making, that when we establish AIP locations with the registrars that are there, is that by default establishing an absentee by mail location? Because there are registrars there, and therefore under the code, they can't accept absentee by mail.
I would have to say, Mr. Day, that I think that there will be a difference of opinion regarding that. I think that's a fair
Well, I
point
mean,
to make.
to be honest, we cut through all the stuff. I think that's right where we are, is whether or not the established AIP locations with the registrars are legitimate to accept ABA ballots by virtue of there being sworn
I
registrars
think
there.
there's an argument to be made that that's the case. And so from a posture, in a defensive posture, that's an argument I would make. Conversely, I think as a factual matter, there could be a question regarding whether there was evidence in the record to support that. I think there's an argument, I think there's a defensible argument that in establishing the AIP locations with registrars there, that established that possibility. Clearly, the letter from the state election board suggests that they don't think that's what has happened. Does that make sense?
Oh, do you
But I
think
think-
that's what they're saying?
Oh, I'm convinced, otherwise they wouldn't be up, if they thought we had done it, they would never have sent us a
But I would say this is essentially a different answer than they got. I mean, this exact same question went up
Oh, I agree.
2020 to
Right.
Chris Harvey, the state
But the
election
law wasn't
director.
in place.
It was. It's
Yeah,
not-
this
No,
law hasn't
The
changed.
law on drop boxes was not in place. That's why Senate Bill 202 came in 2021, because those drop boxes were not allowed by law, so they added those statutes to it.
You're correct, but
Madam
the
Chair, let's ask
question, the question of a registrar, can a registrar at an absentee voting location accept an absentee ballot without this being set up? That question was asked of Chris Harvey, the state election director in 2020.
Oh, I don't know,
And, I mean, that's what, from Lynn has told me, that Christie and Lynn went to the state election director, and he said, yes, you can't accept this at the fairgrounds.
But that was before the
But those are two
vote
different
integrity
tracks.
bill. Well,
Those are two, the whole thing about drop boxes is, it doesn't address this at
It's
all,
not the
Alice.
same law.
It's a different procedure, it's a different
All right.
protocol, it's a different animal.
the thing is that we may establish it, which means we also may not establish it, according to the line in 382A. It says the Board of Registrars may establish. The word may establish means that we also may not
So
establish.
let me ask this question.
So we need to take this up
So
of
let
whether
me
we're
ask
gonna
this
do it
question
in a
then.
second.
May or may not.
Go ahead.
May or may not, you're right. So my question would be both sides. Why wouldn't we want to remove any barriers to make it easier for people to be able to vote? To me, it's like, I guess I'm trying to see the problem in creating an atmosphere that makes it a little easier for people to drop off their ballots put it in the hands of someone that they believe and trust, that are registrars, that are sworn. You have the process that you just listed out, which sounds like the very same process that they've listed out. It's reconciled on a daily basis. It's not as if there is something wrong. I'm just trying to find out what would be so horrible with people being able to hand their ballots to sworn registrars in 5 other locations that just did not have drop
Well,
boxes.
that goes against the Dropbox law. So we have a
Goes
conflict
against the
here.
drop box?
Yes, because the drop boxes are to collect paper by mail ballots, and they are legislated, and it's passed, it's been signed of how many we can have.
Right.
So if we're going to allow every single AIP location to collect paper absentee by mail ballots, we are circumventing the law that says we can only have 6 drop boxes, 1 at the headquarters and 1 for every 100,000 active registered voters. So we are making every single AIP location a de facto drop
I
box.
do hear what you're
Now,
saying, yeah,
whether, and maybe that's fine, okay, and maybe it's not fine.
No, but my question, I'm just trying to stop.
Yeah.
The drop boxes came along later. What I'm asking, just for clarity, did the drop boxes being established eliminate the other law? Because we want to go to law and say this law says this and this law says that, and I understand that. They established the laws for the drop boxes, but did that replace what was already established prior with the other? That's the
That would
question.
be something a judge to answer, not us to
But I mean,
answer.
it's in here still, right?
That's the problem, right, Melanie?
Well, so it's, I think, well, this is my own personal opinion. I think that it is, for as many bills as were considered during the period after the 2020 election, we ended up with SB 202 that took the, regarding drop boxes, that took the emergency rules and put them into law. When you look, the 21-2-382 provision that allows the collection of absentee ballots at AIP locations, that law was not amended. It was right in the very same section. If you look at a marked up version of the bill, I don't have it with me, I can pull it up, I can typically have my marked up version. 382A was amended by the General Assembly, because it was that section that they added all of the drop box provisions. If you look at 21-382, that section addresses firstly about establishing AIP locations, and then it goes on in C1 to set up the drop box rules.
Mm-hmm.
So one has to accept that the General Assembly was aware that yes, they were providing for drop boxes, but they also were aware in that very same code section that they were preserving the ability for ABMs to be collected. I mean,
It's in here.
it's here.
So that's why I was saying
when-
it's in here.
if perhaps they didn't mean that, that's one thing.
Yes.
But I can only look at what's in the very section that they did amend, because everything in C1 about drop boxes was amended. They looked at 21-382. I mean, perhaps they didn't understand it. It's possible, but this is the law that comes. Was amended by.
Well, what about
382.
21-2-383, the preparation and delivery of the ballots?
I don't have a marked up version
In
of that.
In C, it says, I think this is, as I stated in my opening statement, we are conflating 2 different types of absentee ballots. We are said the drop boxes are for the paper absentee by mail, and they have been regulated by code of how many we can have. There is another type of absentee ballot which is in person by a machine. And that's what we are conflating together, that the preparation and delivery of ballots, if you go to 383C, it says that the absentee ballot shall be done by an electronic ballot marking device, shall be used for casting the absentee ballot. So what we're doing is we're saying that an in-person machine vote is the same as the regulations, or the codes are the same as for the paper ballot, and they are not. And that was and all the time, we get it all the time here on this board, we hear it from Melanie, from you, Melanie, that what is the intent of the voter, what is the intent of the law? The intent of a law to establish legally a drop box so that you don't have to put your ballot into a mailbox. It is regulated with how many we can have, where we can have them, all right? So we're saying that as long as we have early voting, absentee by mail, paper ballots can be accepted because there's a person there that has been sworn as a registrar, because that's what it seems to say in section A of 382. But then if you go to 383 with the delivery of the ballots, it says that it's a absentee ballot in person is by a ballot marking device in C. So that's the conflict that we have here.
I think though that, Alice, I would offer that what they're saying is you can't show up at an AIP place and say, give me an absentee ballot to mark by hand. That's what that's about. You have to vote on the ballot marking device. That's what that's what that requirement I think is about.
But the letter from the state elections board obviously is asking us to establish something. They want us to vote on whether the early voting locations are going to be, let's call them satellite offices or an absentee ballot clerk. Our office is at 455 right down the street, Grayson Highway, is where our registrars and absentee ballot office is. They want us to make satellite locations of all these AIP locations. It circumvents the drop box because they deliberately limited the number of drop boxes. They're not anywhere we want to put them. They're not outside. They're not under video surveillance. They are inside. They have to be locked. We have to notice if it's opened in the morning and the poll manager, and I'm just remembering this from reading all this, if the poll manager sees that there's ballots inside the drop box when it was supposed to have been locked and emptied the night before, she has to call the office, she has to relock it. There is a lot of rules and regulations that go with that drop box. There's not as many rules and regulations that go to that purple bag that's marked ABM. It's just put it in the purple bag. Now, if the board is going to have to decide whether, and I will ask for a motion from someone, but are we going to establish that all early voting locations becomes what I call satellite offices of the absentee ballot clerk or the registrar's office? Are we gonna say yes, or are we gonna say no? If we say yes, from tomorrow on, they should be able to collect the paper ballots. If we say no, they will stop the process of doing it. One problem is that we have already added what we have already collected into the pool of absentee ballot paper by mail ballots.